Hello, town meeting members. My name is Robert Dermody. I'm a member of your Community Preservation Committee. This presentation will provide an overview of Article 11 to appropriate $90,200 of Community Preservation Act funds to restore and save the front porch of the historic First Baptist Church building on Great Plain Avenue at the corner of Warren Street. Community preservation funding is reserved in part for the preservation and restoration of historic buildings. The First Baptist Church is requesting that a portion of the community preservation funding available be used to preserve the historic porch on their building. When reviewing eligibility of this project for funding, the CPC determined that the Community Preservation Act allows the use of CPA funds for historic preservation projects such as this one. According to the Massachusetts Community Preservation Database, hundreds of historic church restoration projects, very similar to this one, have been funded all across Massachusetts in the 20 years of the program's existence. In addition, the church provides use of their spaces for a broad selection of groups in town, for both youth and adult activities throughout the year, such as music, dance, arts programs, AA meetings, and First Night Needham events each year. Furthermore, during our due diligence phase, the committee determined that the First Baptist Church building is listed on the town's inventory of historically significant structures. Finally, since 2006, Needham Town Meeting has approved over a dozen projects from non-town organizations totaling over $1 million. I'll now provide some background and context for this project. The First Baptist Church is requesting community preservation funds to aid in the restoration and preservation of the front porch of their historic building. In recent years, the mahogany columns and porch structure have experienced distress and deterioration due to weathering and the passage of time. The columns, which are hollow and made of mahogany slats, are actively rotting, and the concrete and mortar of the porch steps is failing and cracking. There is a prominent cornice piece on the back upper corner of the porch structure that is also decaying to the point that there is a rather large hole present where pieces of the cornice have fallen out. The church hopes to address this deterioration now, before it gets worse, to preserve the structural integrity of this historic Needham landmark. First Baptist Church is one of the oldest structures in town. The oldest part of the structure dates to 1856. It was one of the first buildings of prominence in what is now Needham Center. In its original location at the corner of Highland and Great Plain Ave, its clock served as the town of Needham's first official clock. And according to Gloria Grice of the Needham Historical Commission, with its prominence and proximity to the railroad, the Baptist parish helped anchor the new center of Needham with its first house of worship and its first significant public building. Businesses and stores followed soon after, creating a town center for Needham that exists to this day. Not only is the First Baptist building of historic significance to the town, but its porch structure and facade are significant architecturally to the community's streetscape and to Needham's quintessential New England character. This project meets all the requirements of the town of Needham for preservation funding. In addition, the Needham Historical Commission has expressed unanimous support for the funding and restoration of this project. One question that may be on folks' minds is whether or not the community preservation funds can or should be used to preserve religious buildings or structures. As mentioned earlier, there is precedent for the use of CPC funding toward the restoration of historically significant religious structures, including churches in Massachusetts, where often the oldest historic structures of significance in towns are the churches. Towns had to have a parish in order to incorporate, much like Needham. It may be helpful to remember that the community preservation funding, in the case of this project, is only being used to restore and preserve the historical nature and structural integrity of the building itself, the exterior of the structure of the building, and is not being used toward the restoration of religious images, symbols, or any iconography. It is also worth noting and reiterating that community preservation funding in no way has a connection to or use toward the mission or programming of the First Baptist Church, and does not indicate support of those endeavors of the church community or its beliefs. Again, community preservation funding is not about furthering the church's mission. It is about preserving the historic and significant landmark in our town. It is about the physical building itself. I will now share some slides provided by the proponents that will display the scope of the project and the work that needs to be done with some photographs. So a quick summary of the project indicates that there are 4 main components to this project: the columns, the cornice, the moldings, window casings, and trim work, and finally the steps, capstones under the columns, and landing of the front porch. As mentioned earlier, the columns of the porch are beginning to show signs of rot and decay. The columns that are comprised of individual slats of mahogany and are hollow are beginning to deteriorate from the inside. You can see some of the cracking between the slats of the columns, as well as holes that are beginning to appear at the base of the 2 exterior columns in the photographs on the right of this slide. A consultant referred to for this project, a Tom Everts of Yankee Steeple, is proposing the use of a structural steel column encased in a fiberglass shell that will provide an effective, structurally sound, and practical long-term solution for these columns. They will be smooth columns along with capitals and bases that will appear identical to the original historic columns design. Another location there is significant deterioration is on a rear cornice piece of the porch. You can see that the plaster and mortar original to this ornamental cornice is crumbling. In fact, chunks of the cornice have fallen out, leaving a gaping hole in the upper rear corner of the porch structure. This will be restored in replicating in the historic ornamentation by creating a mold from the opposite side cornice piece. It will also be, any internal damage will also be restored and repaired, and any decay will also be fixed, located in this area of the cornice where the hole is. In addition to the work on the cornice, any minor deterioration to the moldings, trim work, and window casings on the facade of the porch will also be addressed, including painting and recaulking where it is found to be necessary. These windows and doors and the trim can be seen in the photographs on this slide. The last major component of the project involves the front steps. This will include both the demolition of the existing concrete steps and the replacement with granite. So this will include the steps themselves, the landing in front of the front door, and the capstones that support each of the columns. By replacing the failing steps and this structure, this will ensure the investment of all of the work above on the cornice and the columns, etc. This will provide a solid foundation for the porch, enhancing the longevity and integrity of the building structure. This last slide includes several numbers related with project costs. They are grouped according to the categories I mentioned earlier. So in the first box at the top, there are 3 numbers, and those relate to the work on the columns, the cornice, and the trim work. So those numbers are $96,000 for the column replacement, $63,000 for the cornice work, and $37,500 for the trim and molding work. The next box on the slide has two numbers. These are costs associated with the front steps portion of the project. So the first one is $20,000 for demolition and removal of the existing concrete steps. The second number, $54,000, is for the installation of new granite steps, capstones, and landing in front of the front door. The next box includes two numbers for contingency that was recommended to the First Baptist Church by their consultants due to the nature of the project being a historic reservation and given the existing conditions of the building that is already experiencing deterioration. Therefore, the total estimated project cost is $378,000, $700,000. First Baptist Church plans to cover $288,500 of the project costs. Their request is for funding in the amount of $90,200 towards this project. This number is 1/3 of the cost of the project after subtracting the contingency estimates. And this decision was reached in consultation with the CPC committee in discussions with the proponent. The committee indicated that we would not fund contingency costs. So they're removing those numbers to reach a base cost of $270,500, 1/3 of which will be $90,200, and that's the amount of their request. Their request would not exceed that amount. So in conclusion, the Community Preservation Committee unanimously recommends adoption of Article 11. We also request your support to appropriate the sum of $90,200 from CPA funds for the preservation of this historic Needham artifact. Thank you.